Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. It's really great to see you all, so many people coming from all over the place. It's been a really wonderful couple of months pulling this together, and just the contributions and the different voices and really just the energy for the event. We're really excited and really appreciate you all coming. So my name is Jim Bassett. I'm the director of the School of Architecture, and I want to just do a brief introduction. Well, actually, it's not that brief. Settle in. I wanted to start with thanks, and I think that this is a celebration, to be sure, and a chance to really reflect on the impact of Gene over the years for all of us in different ways. But I think it's also an event really underscored by a spirit of thanks and thankfulness. When I read a lot of the Laparello that people shared, Laparellos that people shared, there's a lot of the similar types of comments. And I think just the things that have come to us over these past few months, for sure, kind of ground this experience or this next couple of days in a spirit of again, thanks and thankfulness. And of course, I want to say my first thanks to Gene for all that he generously shared over the years. And not just with me, but with everybody that you can read in the exhibition. And I think in the stories that you'll share with each other over the next few days. And of course, thanks for bringing us all together. So this is the long part. Many people have made this event possible. And I'd like to start with Gene's family, Kirsten and Dorothy. Thank you both. And I hope that you all will get a chance to visit with them during the reception. Kirsten's going to share a few words during the reception as well. Yeah, there's a lot to say. We had so many meetings kind of arriving to today, and we're really thrilled to share this event, with you. And I think that, I celebrate the impact of Gene on all of us, the school, the us individually, and of course on the education of the architect, the idea of education. Also want to thank Ron Daniel. Ron, I'm sure Ron talked to every single one of you. I don't know how many phone calls he made, but he blew up his phone bill, to be sure. Emails the same. I got 3 emails from him last night alone. And that's probably average for the last few months. I don't know how many meetings you've had, Ron. A lot. But I'll say this, Ron has done an extraordinary amount of work. He even was bestowed the title event coordinator, which he is wearing very proudly on his tag. Yeah, he's embarrassed by it. He's embarrassed by it, so please point that out when you talk to him. I also want to thank, again, we'll get through the list here, Mark Blizzard, who did the Laparello design, and it's really a kind of a structure for us sharing stories. Camden Whitehead, who I haven't seen Camden, I just see Camden now. Camden, who did the poster design and production, and there's a very generous hand. This is Camden's poster behind us, and we have a poster for everybody. I don't know exactly, maybe we'll make, after I talk to Camden to find out where they are, we'll announce it a little bit later on, but there's a poster for all of you that Camden made. Terry Ammons, where Terry is Terry. Terry worked on the exhibition in Kogel Lobby. And when I say work on it, I mean work on it. He's been on that for a week. And it's kind of interesting. I experienced it a little bit like an exhibition inside of an exhibition, where all day yesterday, and I mean all day, from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., he was installing the show methodically, carefully. It was really a kind of a sort of instruction of how to install an exhibition. So I hope that you all will have a chance to see that in Kogel is really moving. Marie Paget, who, Marie just knows how to pull off an event, and she's a kind of spirit guide for all things events. So I'll put in a pin on the food you'll be enjoying later, and Marie's responsible for bringing that to us. And David Chance for the many images that you saw kind of cycling early on today, and many images in the lobby as well. And thank you to all of you who contributed stories and images for the exhibition, or shared email lists and contacts, and generally just helped us get the word out about the event. And many people did so who weren't actually able to attend, and I hope that they're able to hear this and participate on Zoom. This is being broadcast. Thank you to our colleagues in the college, Julia Allen, Tanya Ridpath, and Zai Cook in Advancement, who did a lot of work helping us get our lists together and also get the work out. Lauren Hobbs, who you've seen kind of running around, she stitched together all the tiny pieces that helped this event make sense. Thank you, Andrew Durfee and the communications team, who's recording, documenting, and connecting this event outward to our community. And to the many students involved, Ashlyn Philbrook, designed the name tag, Bryn McClatchy printed out all of the Laparillos, and then our student ambassadors who are here today. And I hope you'll get a chance to meet them if you want to talk about what are you doing. Maybe, I don't know if they're in the room, but yeah, they are back in the back. Raise your hands. Thank you. Sorry, I've lost my place here. That is Belle Thornburg, Spencer Silverman, Jack Classic, and Max Mustaine. Thank you all for helping out. And thank you, Hillary Bryan, for mining our archives for exhibit material, and for mounting the work in room 300, and generally helping organize all of the discussions which are happening tomorrow. Clive Vorster for installing dozens of images. If you go into Kogel, go up the west stair to get to room 300, and you're going to see a pretty extraordinary wall of photographs that his students made while they were traveling in Europe, but during the pandemic. And so there are no people on the streets for the most part. It's a kind of weird and eerie moment, but it's beautifully captured. Thank you, Bill Galloway, and all of our panelists. I'm going to let Bill introduce everybody, because otherwise you're going to think this is just too much. A little bit more. And thanks to everybody who contributed to the exhibition. I hope that you all can spend time with this work. The reflections that range from the deeply personal and heartfelt memories of Jean as a nurturing person in their life, to those that also nurturing Jean the tiger, demanding and challenging. And I think most of us knew Jean across that range. That range for sure mirrors my own experience. Jean, a kind of teacher to all students, whether or not they were in his class, but also a teacher's teacher. Whether by profession or not, many of you in the room are also teachers, or find yourself in this kind of role, sharing insights with junior colleagues or children or whomever needs to see more clearly. Look closely, pay attention. There is more than meets the eye. And where teaching is showing and not telling, it's also asking good questions to help a student come to a realization in their own way and to own it in their own way. Jean always seemed to know how to get us all to ask the question that needed asking. So thank you all again for being here. I want to pass the mic over to Dean Lu Liu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. It's really good to see everyone. I have seen many of you on my road from Boston to Chicago to New York. It's good to see you. And welcome home, Hockey Architects. This is what a special moment. We've been looking forward to this, been excited by this. Sorry that you have to look at me from behind. So this is a very special day. And it's been an honor, privilege to serve as a dean of the college. And it's been a privilege working with outstanding faculty, with a lot of faculty here. Also, we had a former dean, Jack Davis. Thank you for coming back. And also the former intern dean, Rosemary Business is here as well. Thank you for being part of the community. So again, it's very special that many of you came all the way from some of Colorado, the West Coast, Boston, coming back home. And you know, home is not just a place. Home is this could be it's about culture, about people, and people like Gene. It's about getting together, the time together. I think today is very special. We get to celebrate Gene's legacy. And so personally, I do not know Gene, but I might have talked to him sometime in the past. So I think I came to Virginia Tech from Taiwan to Auburn to Virginia Tech. I think Gene came here from Mississippi to Auburn to Virginia Tech. We had some people overlap. And so one thing is, when I travel, when I talk to alumni, a lot of time I ask who are your professor you remember the most, who inspire you the most. A lot of time, people say Gene. People say Gene. It's just so inspiring. And for those graduates here, for them today, I'm really excited. We got a graduate from 1971. Maybe somebody even graduated earlier, but the earliest class was 1971. Also, we have students here of the class of 2029. So I do not even to calculate how many years we're talking about, but it's such a beautiful thing. We are together in the room. And for those graduates many years ago, this is feel like you're coming back to a classroom. So you're gonna hear from your professor. You better take notes. If you you better ask good questions, but it's very special. And also it's the School of Architecture is doing so well. And I arrived a year and a half ago, and I'm still amazed, still impressed by the program. Is so big and so good. Usually when it's easier to manage a program in good quality when they're small, but it's the faculty are just amazing to be able to deliver a curriculum that is quality so high, but also we still can educate and impact a lot of people. And the students, I travel a lot, but a lot of times some institutions, we got very talented students, but sometimes they do not have very good work ethics. And sometimes they are hardworking students, but seems like they're still missing something. But here, our students are both talented and hardworking. They're just amazing work ethics. Also, I think what they have been learning is amazing. I think Gene and other faculty members, been over the years, there's such a strong foundation. We challenge the student to learn the best skills, but they have to think very deep and very hard. So that differentiates us with other institutions. So it's just as amazing. These programs continue to be very strong. So thank you again for coming back. And I look forward to hearing everything. And also, I really appreciate many of you being strong supporters of the programs. You should be very proud, and the program is going to continue to be very strong and be excellent. So I look forward to chatting with you all, and have a great day and half. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn over to the real program, Bill. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here to celebrate Gene's influence on the school, on all of us. And I hope you're warm and dry. We've had beautiful weather for the last week, and we arranged this specifically for those who might be nostalgic for some fall Blacksburg weather. I can hear Gene say, andiamo, so we're going to get started. So we have a distinguished panel here that know Gene in various capacities as students, as colleagues, sometimes both. And, we're fortunate to have them talk a little bit about Gene's influence and I'm going to let them talk. So let me introduce the first of our panelists, Sean O'Rourke. Sean is an architect in Philadelphia, leads the architecture discipline at Colliers Engineering and Design, which is a national AE firm, 2,600 people in the firm. He served as a full-time architecture faculty member at a number of universities in Philadelphia, often contributes also as a visiting critic. He co-authored a book about Philadelphia with the photographer Jerome Lukowitz. Am I pronouncing his name right? Pretty much. Portraits of the City. He graduated from Virginia Tech in 1983, and he taught here for a year following graduation. So please welcome Sean O'Rourke.
That was a test. I'll fail to do Edgar justice, but thank you for letting me try. There are no anecdotes but one, and it's at the end, and it's not mine. I was never an Edgarite. I never sat in his foundation or upper level studios. I don't think he ever gave me a grade in my 5 years. He never owed me any attention, but he gave me more than I deserved, and I took what I could. As a freshman, sophomore, I sat in Ron's studio or the Danae's, but at the time, all of them floated in and out of our studios, fluid in whose work they wanted to talk about. They worked together sometimes and in a similar manner, questioning with a demeanor that could be frustrating until we figured it out, or thought we did, or we just stopped worrying about it. Edgar was a little bit different. I remained on the first 2 floors of Kogel as much as I could in my upper years, but never in his studio. I sat with others who didn't have a studio, though he was one of the few foundation teachers that had a critical mass of my peers in upper level that could maintain a studio. And I see many of you out there, and the range of personalities and skill sets and interests were diverse and divergent. Some were and some still are friends. Some wouldn't give me the time of day. They were big personalities, worked hard, and went in so many different directions at once. It was a wonder how Edgar ran that studio, but he did. And he treated it as a studio. So it was a common habit to bring them all together to talk in a room about whatever, their work, architecture, his own interests. There were less descrits if work could be pinned up or laid on the floor, and I would eagerly join the audience, trying to get something out of it. Is any of this special? Not yet, but bear with me. I went to Philly, got a job, finally got a chance to teach, and I realized how I was taught in foundation studio and in the upper years studios wasn't normal. I was teaching alongside and competing with peers from Cornell, Yale, and the rest of the East Coast schools, each who brought to their studios a rigor and depth that I didn't have. What did I have? I guess I had what Edgar modeled on a day-to-day basis, what Tom Reagan later explained or tried to. It was a pedagogical position I had to articulate and practice. I had to reconcile what I saw worked at Tech with what I saw everyone else thought was the right way to do it. And Edgar was my model. So now this is about Edgar. Edgar had the uncanny ability to know when to intervene and when not to. He had the intuition to know how to do it. He could deflate the best of us when we're so full of our certainty. He could encourage us when we're at our most paralyzed with doubt. He did it in front of the studio, publicly, sometimes with humor, sometimes with bluntness, but never with malice. He did it privately, late at night, after hours, over a beer at Greeks, in the stairwell and the elevator. And mostly we took it well because it was about the work and the effort. But sometimes like a father, it was about us too. And he was passionate about all of it. This is a quote from him. You can read it. I'm not going to read it again, but I'm going to take it apart like a critic because I want to talk about it because it's so like Gene. So this is an architect describing what an architect does, right? I never knew Edgar wrote anything. In 5 years, I never saw anything he wrote down, never read anything he wrote, but I found this later. And I feel like only Edgar would have expressed it like this, right? This is what an architect does, describing what architects do. But look at it. With the first couple of words, he mixes grapple, the most tactile, visceral verb, not very academic, right? Alongside heuristic and iterative. I don't think those two words are in any of my offices. It's not your everyday vocabulary. It's very much academic speak. But next to grapple, and the sentence runs on circuitously, runs in a direction nonetheless, but with a couple of sidebars that both confuse and clarify. No question, the intensity and the productive. You can't be any more clear, right? Then he partners thought/time. I was thinking I had to read this because we weren't sure we could get this out. And I'm like, how do you read that? Productive thought/time? Productive, why didn't he just say thought and time? Who knows, right? It's an uncommon pairing though. They're brought close enough to kiss, but not. And consider the two, thought, cerebral, subjective. It's a form of attention, almost like prayer, but it's unhinged from time because it encompasses all scales, the instantaneous eureka to the generation. For 20 years, I want to make a book. I've got an idea. And then time, rather than subjective, it's fairly objective to most scientists until you start thinking about it. It's a measure of duration that I might suggest has no scale, just outwardly expanding forward and backward. Let's keep going. Couple of phrases, not exactly tangential, but still ill-defined problem environments. This slowed me down. Sounds like a euphemism. A place one goes, or is it in there that I give attention to it? Is it sick or is the definition sick? And I get distracted at this point because I realize this is what sketching is about. But that's another thing. I digress, not like Gene, never to digress. We're coming to a close, right? At play. Imagine 3 6-year-olds in a room, the energy, the fun, the enthusiasm. And then leading to, in any product realization, all I can imagine is a laboratory guy with a white coat, pocket protector, clipboard. So this is an architect describing what an architect does, right? Until you realize he's talking about all things designed, a spoon, a poster, a city, a sketch, perhaps. It's about our profession and almost all the creative practices too. But now I realize he's talking about life, designing a life. I think only Edgar could have written this. It's expressed like he would only could or would. I imagine, or you guys can imagine, teaching it to us, half-formed adults. We're still children at 18. This is what he did so well. And he performed it with a certain amount of joyful enthusiasm and a willingness to be vulnerable, to think out loud in front of us, to sketch alongside us, open-hearted, at times affectionate. There's a relatability that made him accessible. And remember it was about architecture and life, really. So step back, here's my anecdote, it's not mine, Peter Peterlin said, don't you remember at Greeks, we got into an argument about which was better, Burger King or McDonald's? Right? Edgar, and I think Ron, you were part of this. They were dogmatic. It was the Big Whopper. It was architectural. There was no question about it. It wasn't even a discussion. Is that architecture or is that life? That's it.
Thank you, Sean. We'll save our questions till a little bit later, and then there'll also be some time for the audience to make comments and ask questions. I'll introduce our next panelist. Mitzi Vernon is a Virginia Tech MArch graduate from 1986. She also has a product design graduate degree from Stanford. She was a professor of industrial design here from 1995 to 2015 before becoming the dean at the University of Kentucky. As the dean there, she brought Jean to Lexington for a workshop, field drawing workshop, and she helped sponsor Jean's book, The Paradox of Place in the Line of Sight. You've probably seen that book. She completed her 7th year as dean in August of 2022. She launched a new product design program there. She was able to produce basically a project for new space and adaptive reuse of a tobacco warehouse called the Gray Design Building. Groundbreaking occurred on that new facility in August of 2022, and the college took residency last spring, which is a huge accomplishment. So welcome, Mitzi Vernon.
I didn't know we were going to do a podium until I walked in here. I thought we were going to be like a panel, you know, having a conversation. So I was all prepared for that. So, hey, and I didn't know about this. And so I saw that and I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what he used to do. You would see him, you know, towering figure, and he'd look at you and he'd say, hey, and it would have this kind of lift when he said that. And it all came back to me as soon as I saw that. So that wasn't a prepared thought for you today, but so a little bit more context. So when I was a student here, I really didn't know Jean very well. I knew of him. I could see him. I could feel him. I would say that he was atmospheric, and some of that was about his height, and some of it was about that. So I didn't know him very well, but I then went away and moved to a couple of different states. I taught. I went back to school. I came back. Was recruited here to teach and to help start the industrial design program here. So we were very green. Even though I had taught for a while, I'd been a student also most recently. And so I was kind of coming back into what it meant to teach design and to teach industrial design, which I had not done at that point. So that was, I was green, and, you know, we were all trying to figure out how to start this program, right? And having done that again at Kentucky, I understand that something, it's just an inevitable process that you have to jump through all kinds of hurdles and find your ground and figure it out. It just takes a minute. But in one of those moments, I remember we were launching some kind of exhibit in the lobby at Kogel. And I was feeling all degrees of frustration. Part of that was just adjusting to moving from California back to Virginia. But I remember, you know, being frustrated about the exhibit and not being happy with it, and other people not being happy with it. And Jean said to me, Mitzi, it's all about density. And I thought, I just looked around and I thought, oh, yeah. And I have never forgotten that moment. It sounds simple, but it truly isn't simple, you know, and it was really important about teaching and how you teach young students, you know, how to appreciate their work adjacent to their neighbors, And that was just a huge lesson for me at that level, but it carried forward for me over and over again as a teacher. So I was here for 20 years teaching in that fledgling program that became not so fledgling. But I carried that forward when I was recruited as dean, and I began to think of that as a way to think about your people. And your levels and layers of people, you know, being in that dean's position, you are navigating that interstitial space between the upper administration and your faculty and your students and trying to navigate that. And I began to think of Jean's thoughts about density and how important that was to have that around you at all times. So I've given quite a lot of thought to density that way. And then, so I should say this, that Jean and I traveled to Europe with students in 2001, and literally on the heels of 9/11. And I remember there was so much in the college, we were talking about, were we going, were we not going? Should we go, should we not go? So it was a tense moment, but it was another opportunity to see that density alive in the cities in a different way, and also in Jean's work and also in his students' work. So I got to kind of revel in that again. And the essay that I wrote for his book is about that experience. I'm going to just read an excerpt for you from that. But I want to mention too that, so Jean, as Bill was saying, Jean did come to Lexington, and Dorothy also, which was wonderful to have them there in that atmosphere with those students going afield. So he worked with them in the field in Midway, a town in between Frankfurt and Lexington. And we were able to do a beautiful exhibition for him. And we were able to do that in the Downtown Arts Center in Lexington. So lots of exposure, just a beautiful atmosphere of his work, which was once again, this kind of collection of density. I'd never seen so much of his work in one place. And that really became the backbone of that book. So that it was just this kind of layering and layering of density. And I still think about that today. I've never forgotten it. It is still important to me when I think about my own work, when I think about stories and writing. And I've just come off of a 4-day workshop, storytelling workshop, because of a project that I'm working on. And as I was looking back over this essay, which I hadn't looked at for years now, until a couple of days ago when I was thinking about this talk. And I realized that one of the things I talk about is that same guy that I did that workshop with many years ago. I did this again just literally about 3 days ago. So I'm going to read a small section out of that. I think for me, it really talks about what I witnessed in Jean's drawing, because we happened to be at a monastery, just the two of us working during that time in 2001. And the weather that day was very much like the weather here today. And it was so symbolic of 9/11 and everything that we were feeling during that entire trip and what had just happened to the country. Jean draws a place as if passing through solid matter, allowing us to understand the composition of the building, the town square, and the village. Look to any of his sketches for a range of scale handled nimbly by a lofting, delicate line suggesting interior or exterior height, while abutting the smallest tactile detail, all as if the fingers were tracing the surface of the actual structure. Jean is a master of the juxtaposition of foreground, background, and the ground in between as storytelling. Writer and editor Tom Jenks discusses the difference between visual and written narration as the difference between expository, such as film, which expounds with information about characters and story rather than directly embodying them. The writer, Ursula K. Le Guin, explains story as something that must move, but does not necessarily require plot or relentless action. It is often just a situation, an unspoken thought, or a conversation. And John Gardner describes seeing through words, not as an essayist, but by providing imagery for our senses, preferably all of them, not just the visual sense, so that we seem to move among the characters, lean with them against the fictional walls, taste the fictional gazpacho, smell the fictional hyacinths. This is Gene's deafness, what separates his architectural hand from others. He draws transparently to explain a situation, exposing detail that we would not otherwise see, storytelling. And I would say that density is exactly what he shares with us transparently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mitzi. Our third panelist is Bert Pinnock. Bert is a principal and chairman of the board at Baskerville, 125-year-old design firm based in Richmond, Virginia. Over his 30-plus year career, Bert's commitment and passion has created impactful work for neighborhoods, cultural institutions, forward-thinking organizations, including many universities, the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, the Better Housing Coalition, etc. A founder of the nonprofit Storefront for Community Design, Bert also currently serves on the City of Richmond Planning Commission, is a board member of the Legal Aid Justice Center, Historic Richmond Foundation, and Venture Richmond, amongst numerous other board and committee engagements. He frequently speaks and writes on the impact of race, power, and societal norms on design, memorialization, and community, which includes lectures and panel discussions with a number of organizations, including the Society of Architectural Historians, the Urban Design Annual Conference, and the Congress for a New Urbanism. Bert is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and the Virginia AIA 2022 William C. Nolan Medalist. He's a 1992 graduate of Virginia Tech. Welcome, Bert.
I'm intimidated by that. My esteemed colleagues were very prepared with notes, and I just have to speak about Jane from the heart a little bit. But I want to describe to you how I arrived here. Allora, più di 40 anni fa sono arrivato da lì sulla collina, qui alla università, alla scuola di architettura. Avevo un'idea cosa fa un architetto, come funziona, cosa sarà. That right there. All of that is what my first year felt like. It was, what is happening? I was in a fog of Ron Daniel and Donna Dene and Gene Egger and a bunch of other 17, 18-year-olds that I think lived in the same space that I did. I have learned, probably in retrospect, doing the kind of work that I've come to do in terms of building agency in communities, where when we go into communities and we speak as architects and planners do, that's a little bit what they hear, right? But it's our job to give them agency, to give them the power of determination. And it's only in retrospect, having been around Gene Egger, that I realized that's what he was doing. That's what Ron was doing. That's what Donna was doing. And Bob and Ferrari. I ventured off the first floor once. I went to Hans Roads on the third floor. I got scared. I came back down after 1 quarter. So I'm not going back up there again. And after about 2.5 years, sort of feeling comfortable that I understand what it means to be here in the School of Architecture, I started to get a little disenchanted because it was this great laboratory. You know, I went to school with folks who would rent these sort of dinky apartments at the top of the Four Squares on Odie Street, rip it apart because they just had this sort of philosophy about how it should go together. We didn't need building permits. We didn't do that. And you know, you start putting it back together. I ripped apart an apartment over on Main Street above some shop. I never got to put it back together. Never put the bathroom back, never put the kitchen back, but that's okay. After, you know, 2.5, getting on the third year, I wrote a little manifesto to the professors at how I was becoming disenchanted with this institution, with this formula of higher education. And I said to Gene, I said to others, you know what? I think I'm gonna take off, go to New York, find a job, do something for a while. Okay, good luck. We'll give you a few contacts. It's like, okay, that is not how my parents reacted, but that was how my professors reacted, including Gene. And after I realized you can't live on $6.75 an hour in Manhattan, I came back after about a quarter. But I had another friend who had just come back. He was Italian and had just come back from Rome, from working with, and if you're of the era, Pia Pasqualino, Paolo Bertolotti, Il Laboratorio, the studio there. And I said, hey, they're looking for somebody. I was like, okay, I'm going to try this again. I'm out. And I left again. And this went on for years. And that's why I can still mutter in Italian a little bit, because Gene said, that's what you need. That is the formula that you've created for yourself to educate you as an architect. Now, in Rome, I was not making much more than $6.75 an hour, and it was just as expensive. And I just want to say, like, learning to sketch saved my life. I would sit in Piazza Navona and find German tourists, French tourists, American tourists, and with my broken Italian, I would tell them, I will draw your picture. And I would draw the picture, and I get paid like 10,000 lira, which is, like $10 at the time. And I don't remember what year, but Gene reached out because he was planning for the next trip with the students. And I was there in Rome and wanted to see if I could put together an itinerary for the students. I say, yeah, sure. But I need like, $300 so I can like make reservations and do all that kind of thing. And he sent it, the lovely, trusting man that he was. And I subsequently spent it on the food and heat and rent that I needed. And he showed up and he was not mad. He just said, okay, well, you'll just be our translator then, and you'll work it off. My tag says 92, but I started in 82. In fact, Sean was like a fifth year in the corner. He was one of those it was like gods on pedestals in the corners of the first floor, if you remember Kogel. Started in 82, finished in 92, but I finished finally because after bopping around for 3.5 years, Gene just said on a different trip, Bert, I beg you, for the love of God, get a degree. And I came back and he took out those little yellow cards that you sort of can sign away things like statics and strengths of materials and that kind of stuff. And he gave me a stack of these things signed. And all I had to do was take studio. And I finished. Lo amo en cuanto que mi arabia. I loved him and hated him in equal measure. And we are who we are today because of that. So thank you for letting me share a little bit with you.
Thank you, Bert. Our last panelist is Professor Frank Weiner. He's taught at the School of Architecture, School of Architecture plus Design, the Department of Architecture at Virginia Tech since 1987, served in a variety of administrative positions, including the head of the department, founding interim director of the School of Architecture and Design, which was established in 2003. His scholarship on the relationship between education, architecture, and philosophy has been presented at conferences around the world and has been widely published. He's the recipient of the 2003, 2005 EAAE Prize. So that's kind of a European organization of architecture schools, for his essay entitled 5 Critical Horizons for Architectural Educators in an Age of Distraction. Professor Weiner serves as the founding curator of the Lucy and Olivia Ferrari Archive, established in 2017. He's a graduate of Tulane University from 1980, Columbia University, master's degree in 1987. Please welcome Frank Weiner.
So I have a couple of housekeeping items since I listened to 4 wonderful talks. On the question of the Whopper, I want to come back to that question because I wasn't at that discussion. This is my thought. The Whopper has a section adequate to its plan. So I don't know, and I think the Big Mac is more of like a mini burger, you know. So you can think about that question because these little things actually are important. Mitzi, you know, your point about transparency and solidity, you stole my idea. So you know how the students always do that? They see someone working and they do a plan and then theirs turns out to be the same. Maybe they weren't sitting and they say, I can't do that because, you know, Betsy did that. I have to do something that hasn't been done before. And that's when I go get a coffee. Okay, Bert, yeah. Speak from the heart. I mean, how beautiful. We can't do better than that. Gene drew from the heart, and I probably have tried over 37 years to write from the heart. Becoming Gene Egger or not being John Malkovich. To know Gene was to encounter Gene. Knowing and encountering are different things. The difference is one key, not the only one key, to understanding the depth and scope of Gene's contributions. Knowing is a form of being, and encountering is a form of becoming. Gene, in my view, was always in a state of becoming Gene. He resisted essentialist pedagogical positions and had an affinity towards the processual. At this point, the Mississippi Gene, and I have 17 of them, the Mississippi Gene would wince. He was attracted to the educational psychology of Jerome Bruner and the process philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead, among a wide range of other thinkers. His home library, a small bookstore in size, filled a good portion of his basement. I've been fortunate. Give me a second. Fortunate to know him, to encounter him for 35 years. Get through this. You're all here for the same reason. Some had longer or shorter associations with him. I don't think that mattered. I think every one of them was memorable, and that's why we're here. Every one of them was memorable. He was a powerful force. I chose the word encounter because it's the word that I feel best describes what it felt like to be his colleague. He was mercurial. I crossed out quicksilver because I really didn't know what that was. Make sure I know what I'm talking about. He was stamped by the ethos of his birthplace. Oh my God, that's the first page. Gee. Starkville, Mississippi, and his adopted city of layers called Rome. He was very proud, and he showed me his American passport that was once issued there. So here's a guy born in Mississippi, some reason attracted to Rome and proud of that connection. The first time I worked with Gene, we were on a fall travel program in the early 90s, and then a number of times after that. I met Gene at the Steger Center, and we went on to the leg that went into Italy. The first stop was at Siena, and we stopped in Vigevano. Why Vigevano, right? To see Piazza Ducale. So I witnessed this dramatic metamorphosis that occurred in Gene as we went from Switzerland to Italy. I didn't recognize it was a different Gene, right? He became more animated. I still remember that moment. How could someone be so animated? And obviously that sense of animation about travel, about Italy, it spread to the students. I mean, you couldn't, it was impossible not to respond to that. We knew Piazza di Calais from Gideon's book, Space, Time, and Architecture. Sorry for the academic reference. The piazza for Gideon, and I think for Gene, was that its spatiality was at the cusp of modernity. So we went to all these old things, and he saw them with modern eyes. This was the remarkable thing. Historically, we didn't travel as historians. Sometimes we didn't know the name and date of things. It didn't matter, especially in the hill towns. You know, where are the drawings? He made the drawings for the hill towns. So Gene and I shared a common passion for Italian culture that became a 35-year conversation. So we got to Siena, and we had a bit of time before dinner. So Gene took me to the Campo. I hadn't been there before. The greatest cultural slope to drain I've ever seen. I thought that was a good one. The only good one. And Gene, so we sat and we got our drinks. I think I ordered the wrong drink, like a Bailey's. It's like Gene was saying, what the hell are you drinking? A Bailey's? You're in Italy, you know? And then he turned to me, he said, why haven't we ever had a beer together? Wow. That broke the American ice. And we were off and running for about 3 or 4 weeks. It was a master's class about the pedagogy of Italian travel, resonating with the students and the junior faculty I was. Today, we do not use the term junior faculty. While we were in Siena, Gene took me to a few lunches, hiding behind in the vicinity of the Campo. I watched the locals feasting on large porcini mushrooms the size of dinner plates. I thought they were steaks. Luckily, I didn't say that to Gene. How do they get these thin steaks? You know, I was born in like Queens. I didn't even know what a mushroom was. I thought all mushrooms were poisonous. The owners knew Gene because he had built a relationship across many years. So I witnessed the Italian Gene and gained insight into the sheer amount of year-round work that goes into making a good travel program. It's not a vacation. I forgot to mention the Brunello di Montalcino wine. So it is a vacation. No, it's not a vacation. Gene was a many-sided person, like in a paragon, which is a geometric figure with an infinite number of sides. I made a partial list of some of Gene's sides. I call it a genegon. Please keep in mind the mathematician Gauss was able to construct a 17-sided polygon with a compass and a straight edge. So I stopped at 17. Auburn Gene, study abroad Gene, Rome Gene / Italian Gene, that was to keep it to 17. Mississippi Gene, New Orleans Gene, worked for Charles Colbert. Sketch Gene, Design Lab Gene, Program Chair Gene, Assistant Dean Gene, Chef Gene, Gourmand Gene, Layer Sketchbooks on the Floor Gene, the quarter to semester conversion Gene, My Daddy Was a Plumber Gene, George Schmertz Gene. To unnerve folks, he would on occasion use the name George Schmertz. Instead of addressing you by your first name, like I'm Frank, and he would come up to me and say, George, Frank, you know, and he would move around like that. Maybe he didn't remember my name, or maybe he did. Maybe he didn't know any of our names. Think about that. Imagine knowing someone for 50 years and they don't know your name. It's pretty cool. So my theory is that it ties back to Fred and Ethel Mertz, who played Lucy and her husband's best friends on the highly successful I Love Lucy comedy show. Maybe that's not true, but let's stay with it. There was the John Portman Gene. In schools of architecture, you weren't allowed to say John Portman. And Gene was always the champion of things that you weren't allowed to say. And unfortunately, he would say them. Portman was not architecturally correct. And somehow there's a connection between Portman and Jefferson that was going on between Jean and Ferrari. I still can't figure it out, and I'm done. I'm retired, literally, as of Labor Day, so I'm not going to follow that one. And then the Hilltown Jean, Pantito, Stiapo, Villano, to name just a few. He found his architectural home in Italy. It began when he traveled there as a student. He got an award and he was able to go. And he took some odd jobs on the way. He once mentioned ditch digging to me. I mean, who these days takes a job digging ditches while on a study abroad tour? It would be against policy. He had an innate capacity for intense physical and intellectual work, something so rare today and so important in the education of an architect. His travel sketches, which you see behind you, are a fusion of both sensibilities. The in situ sketches of towns, Italian hill towns and company towns in the US are demonstrations of the way he distilled his encounter with place or buildings like the magnificent convent of La Tourette. So many in the room maybe went to La Tourette with Jean. It was a touchstone for the school. We had something in common. Go to La Tourette, see if we can figure this crazy place out. Or the wild church of the Autostrada outside of Florence. I'm not sure, but we can play the game, but maybe you all can think about it. If Jean was a building, what building would he be? I have some thoughts, but I won't go into that. Back to his drawings. His network of wavering lines were plumb lines. Remember, his daddy was a plumber, okay, of sensibility, often combining multiple vantage points. The drawings seemed to actually move around a place while he stood or sat in place. They pulled ancient ruins forward into a modern time spirit, as if he was the architect of the places he drew. So we weren't on a history of architecture tour, not at all, not at all. He had a certain gift for seeing and drawing the transparency of architecture in place. That's Mitzi's point. With his lines, solidity became spatially transparent and coherent. Architecture in place were seen as one co-phenomenon to be seen through. I'm sharing with you some of the things I learned from Jean. His lines wove a raiment wrapping a place or a building like a well-constructed coat. They are lineaments of spatial complexity from the order of the classical to the entropy of the vernacular. The horizon line became a belt holding the energy of the sketch together. And I think this is important. He didn't teach students how to sketch, but he taught them how sketching could teach them. Not a skill. It's not a skill. On one study tour, we arrived at the outskirts of Assisi in complete darkness. Maybe you remember Dorothy and Kirsten. It was raining very hard and there was almost no visibility. Jean led the long march along a gravel road to the hotel. The next day, I retraced our route and realized the path was right at the edge of a steep fall-off. So much for risk management. Risk was managing us. That night at dinner, among other things, Jean told the students there were scorpions in Assisi. I could feel everyone kind of lifting, trying to sit down and not touch the ground. This scared the students into uncomfortable calmness. You know, because the students got pretty loud at dinner. I didn't sleep well that night. Nightmaring, not dreaming, of scorpions coming under the door of my room. The next morning, we all went to the Church of San Francesco. In front of the church was a vast grass-sloped piazza. A beautiful green light reflecting off the piazza infused the depth of the nave. You could see a light green haze over the pearl in the altar. The nave was crowded and filled with pilgrims from all over the world. It was noisy and chaotic. One student came up to Jean, I remember it vividly, and complained to Jean about being disturbed by all the noise. You know, it was really noisy in here, and he was looking for kind of a religious experience, I guess. Why not? This is what Jean told him. This is the Grand Central Station of Catholicism. I'm not sure the student understood, but I did, because I thought it was a little noisy too. And sometimes the students ask the questions that we're afraid to ask. Why is it so noisy in here? In Rome one morning, we took the students to Piazza Campidoglio. after we talked with the students about the balustrades and the space between the balustrades. I mean, what the heck were we doing? It was my idea, not Jean's. As an example of the idea of Gestalt, once we finished, the students literally ran away because they wanted to experience Rome. Okay, so Jean walks to one side where there was an iron chain draped between two bollards. He stumbled over the chain and injured his arm. I heard it happen, but did not see it happen. After Jean received the necessary medical attention and a cast, and Dorothy remembers, and he appeared smiling. It was a smile of pain medication and perhaps a stiff drink. But this was the thing that got me. He had an elegant striped Missoni scarf as a sling. Now, did you have that? You have it, yeah. And it's like, what, who does that, you know? He took some time to recover and was quickly back in action with his black custom leather messenger bag in tow, slung over the good shoulder. He only had one good shoulder at that point. In the bag were all the tools of the trade of someone who loved to draw. Just 2 more pages, if you can tolerate it. One of the last design labs Jean taught was a second-year undergraduate lab. I observed with interest as he precisely formulated projects for the students. As one example, he offered a program for the design of an apartment building, and we talked about it, and he decided after our conversation to call it a house for strangers. So it made it a lot more mysterious for the students. It wasn't an apartment house, because guess what an apartment house is? It's a house for strangers, right? You don't know who the person is next to you. But the thing he added is that it had to have a horizontal order and a vertical order. I mean, this is really the kind of mystery of the school. It's like, what are you talking about? When the students hear that, what could that possibly mean? You know, up a line going this way and a line going that way. The last time my team taught with Jean near the end of his full-time teaching career, we developed an idea for a project for a spatial house. It was a group of first-year graduate students, so it was a bit of a risk in the spring semester. And we told them it wasn't simply a house, as a cliche so familiar to them, but a spatial house. Again, what the heck would that mean, you know, if you were a student? I mean, all houses have space. I mean, he was talking about modern space. We didn't tell him that. So I thought it'd be good if the house had a fireplace, because a lot of the kids didn't grow up in houses with fireplaces. And when I gave the program, Jean corrected me in front of the students and said it should be a place of fire. And that made it really excellent. You know? It wasn't a fireplace, it was a place of fire. He would call this massaging the project. It drove me crazy, but it was so necessary. And those in offices and in schools, if you're a teacher or in an office, everything needs to be massaged. He was right. One afternoon under blue skies and scattered clouds, he asked the students to bring their study models outside. He had them one by one stand on a chair and hold their models up to the sky while he took photographs with his camera. What is going on here? I didn't know, the students didn't know, but I kept quiet because something was up. It was a brilliant pedagogical move that completely changed how students saw their own work. You know, wow. That's just one example of this pedagogical sleight of hand he was capable of pulling off. And I witnessed hundreds of them. Once my students made this spatial house for 5 primary forms, and they worked at like this scale, and Jean just walked by and he didn't even stop. And he said, 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. So he left. As soon as he was gone, I told the students, tomorrow you need to make models 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. They were beautiful pieces of jewelry. I couldn't believe it. The students didn't really care, but I thought that was an impressive piece of teaching. And it wasn't me, it was Jean. He could teach your class that you were teaching. You can't do that, that's my studio. That's your studio, this is my studio. He taught us, and this is my end. He taught us there's no knowledge of architecture without a vital, sustained encounter and sometimes a meaningful confrontation with the world of architecture, its allied fields, and with each other. Let's call it a school of architecture plus, but let's put the plus sign as an exponent. So we exponentially expand the field of architecture. So it's an exponent. Today, we may have become a bit too timid and maybe understandably cautious to be able to realize the virtue of his enduring lessons. He was a student's teacher who safeguarded the innocence of their becoming, and he remains an enduring model for all of us. I'm out.
Thank you, Frank. So we'll have a little time for some questions here, and this is not an easy task to try to formulate some common questions, but I guess one I'll start with, because I think Sean mentioned Gene's ability to encourage, and for students as well as for young faculty, that was invaluable. The encouragement that Gene provided. I think we all probably experienced moments when maybe we gave a lecture, we showed a sketch, and Gene said, "Ooh, that's nice." And then he would kind of reformulate what you showed him or what you told him. And it was better than what you told him. It was more clear. It was more interesting, and it was more full of possibilities for development. But I wonder if there are particular instances or stories where maybe Gene did that in your own experience that you might recall. I'll kind of leave it open, maybe any of the panelists want to comment on that or a particular instance. Go for it.
Okay, I'm going to jump right in. And you talked about the teacher's teacher. Did you not?
No, that was Frank.
I was thinking that you started that way too, but.
I gave him the idea.
Oh, I knew it had translated. Yeah, right. No, I think it's so right to, there's got to be so many people in the room that had Gene's teaching mentorship at some point, whether that was in conversation or in the classroom. But I was remembering, I was going to tell the story too, and it's a quick anecdote, but it was that same period when he was talking to me about density, because he was then, I think, the chair of foundation at that moment when I came into teaching here. And so I saw him a lot because of that, because we were teaching the first sophomore class of the industrial design program. So we were trying to figure out where we were, right? But we were, pretty much working with foundation, but he, I was frustrated because I was frustrated a lot those days, kind of normal, but I was frustrated about not having a voice. And I had a voice, and I wasn't feeling like I could use that voice. And I don't remember the circumstance at all, but I remember being in his office and venting my frustration. And I said, I just need some power. And he said, Mitzi, you don't need power, you need freedom. And it was a really interesting thing. I've never forgotten this either. And I've especially thought a lot about that being dean, because you're always, weighing the position that you have and the authority that people have given you. But it was so true, especially as a faculty member, right? It was so true that what you really wanted was someone to give you space to do and be what you wanted to do. And he was so completely right about that. And then the point I want to make about his gentleness is that he was so very good at that, at being clear but gentle, as if someone had just put a soft blanket on you. And he was so really, really, really good at that. And I imagine, not having been a student, but I imagine that's exactly what it felt like being in that position as it was being a faculty trying to learn from him or travel with him, right?
As I reached out to a lot of my peers who studied in his studio, one of the anecdotes that came back to me, and it goes exactly to what you talked about, Bill, was early in foundation studios, no one knew what the hell was going on, right? You talked about that sense of agency, and I never thought about framing it like that, and they never told you that. Like, I want to talk to you later about when you figured that out last week or last year. But in talking to a lot of the freshmen, sitting there and being overwhelmed by the talented people around you who came with skill sets that you didn't have, And you're trying to figure this out compared to high school, where it was like, here's the rules, follow the rules, get the A. And there are no rules. You didn't even know how you got the A. And all you could look at was a lot of different students you thought you were competing with, who all were better than you in the majority of cases. And there were a number of instances talking to my peers who could remind me in anecdotal form of where Gene did that soft touch, where he grabbed something that wasn't great, but by making it great, Bill, by talking about it, he validated it in one way, that effort. And it wasn't always the quality, it was the intense productivity that he recognized. You did this, you stayed up all night, and you're sitting there going, this is shit, I'm embarrassed by this. And he's praising it in ways that you never could in front of everyone else. And you went home and you're like, this is fun, right? And then like the next day he'd pop your bubble, but he knew when to do it, right? And he did it softly when necessary. And it was a validation that for anyone in that confused time in that first 2 years, on occasion, you needed it.
I once, as a young faculty, ended up being the chair of a peer review committee, which gives recommendations about tenure. So it's pretty serious business. And I couldn't find a room, so I found a room in one building on campus. It wasn't a very good room, but I found it. And we had a very heated conversation about the candidate. And when we finished, Gene said, well, Frank, you pick a bad room, you get a bad conversation. Oh, okay, thank you, Gene. Why don't you find the room next time? You know, one morning I walked into Kogel as a young faculty, I don't know, a good hour and a half before my afternoon studio. I thought that was pretty good, you know, come in and get prepared and, you know, don't just come in at 1. We used to start at 1. Now we start at 1:25. What does that mean? 1:25. So Gene looked at me because I got in there early, you know, and he said, where have you been? Well, I live in Blacksburg. I was at home. But he said, you want to make a school? You've got to be here. And it touched me because this was one of the few schools that was, I think, trying to make a school every day. It's not a one-shot deal. You have to make it every day. And I came back and told my wife, Lynn, and she said, well, you're not teaching in the morning. I said, well, we're trying to make a school. You know, so, you know, this went on for 37 years. I'm still married. And anyway, this is the kind of thing Gene could shake you up. And again, you know, he was often right, and it wasn't always, the bedside manner could vary, but he was a damn good doctor, you know?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I'm originally from Tuskegee, Alabama. At a certain point, my mother ended up working in the administration office at Kogel. And somehow, I think that is when Gene understood where I came from in some interaction with my mother. I don't know, but who studied the 16 squares of, come on, y'all. I mean, just seriously, right? And it was in that context, after Gene understood where I came from, that he helped me appreciate the beauty of the small 8,000 person town that I came from in Alabama. Why it was the way it was, why it worked, why it didn't. And being able to see my own hometown through those eyes and understand it in that way was revelatory. And it's one of those things I really appreciate.
Thanks, Bert. Yeah, I mean, Frank kind of preempted the other side of that question, which is when Gene admonished you, you know, which was also, yeah, you know, a wonderful kind of educational moment. I mean, I'll share one. I shouldn't because I'm not on the panel, but I traveled with Gene in either 93 or 94. It was the year after the start of the Bosnian War, and I think the program had been canceled the year before. So there was 75 people on the trip, 2 full busloads. Was anybody on that trip? What year was it? 95, okay. Anyway, so Gene asked me to make, we were going to Florence, a map of Florence so that people could find the various places. So yeah, I did it. I went completely overboard. I made maps of every city we were visiting, Assisi, Siena, lists of all the places. You know, I spent 2 nights Xeroxing in the dean's workroom and brought an entire suitcase of Xeroxes for the students. And so the first night we get to Florence, after dinner, I start handing out all this stuff. You know, and Gene is kind of watching me. And then, you know, after this was done, he said, let's go out for a wine. I don't know if they have grappa in Florence, but they had wine. So, and Gene said, whoa there, Bill. We got to slow this down a little bit. They don't have to see everything in the next 15 minutes. You know, we've got time. And that was a real lesson, you know, that I was way out ahead of you know, the students had just gotten off the bus. They were sort of thinking, what country are we in? You know, and I'm telling them, you've got to see this, and you've got to see that, and don't miss this. And, you know, Gene really taught me that there's a kind of patience to teaching, and you have to, the timing of things is really crucial, because a lot of information is just going to be lost if it's not the right moment for the person to receive it. But that was a very gentle admonishment, you know, over wine, but that was really important. I mean, those were really important for young faculty to hear. I don't know if there were other kind of situations like that, but I thought I would share it. Perhaps there are those in the audience who have something to say, because we've only got about 35 minutes left and we've sort of used up a lot of our time. Are there stories related to your encounter with Gene that you would like to share? There are 2 mics here. Please come, can you? Because there are folks on Zoom who might like to hear what you're saying.
Hi, I'm Tim Machado, class of 95, and I had Gene, I believe it was 92, my second year here. And I remember a lot of his lectures still when my own kids wear sportswear with logos on it. And he would often, I had my Adidas shirt and he said, you know, Machado, are you getting paid for that? I was like, no, why would I get paid? He goes, you're advertising for him. And he's trying to pull off his label of his Levi's. And you know, say wish if he could just pull it off, but his belt was in the way and he's getting, you know. And then another time, you know, the fountain pen, you know, he'd walk around and tell us about, you got to find your own fountain pen because it conforms to your writing. And I think we all went out and bought out all the fountain pens in town. And but you know, I always enjoyed the interactions with him. And I think I was at a point my freshman year where I was thinking maybe this isn't the right program for me. And then those interactions that inspired, that got me, you know, through, and knew that I could do it. And as many of you said, so I'll always be thankful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other things you would like to share? Jordan? Okay.
I just have a humorous story to share about my trip to Europe. I did have the pleasure of doing the travel program with Gene. And at one of the seminars in preparation for the travel, a student named Paul asked, well, how much underwear should I bring? And Gene said, bring 1 pair and wash it each night. And Paul thought he was serious and brought 1 pair of underwear and he washed it every night. So I think there's some of us that got Gene's humor. Paul did not get Gene's humor. So.
Dorothy's gonna kill me for this. But I'm Tony, Kirsten's husband, but just wanna, if you haven't had a chance to see the exhibit upstairs, it was very, very moving, but one thing that jumped out at me, there was a quote that someone had pulled out that Gene would say, "That won't work." And it's so funny because when Kirsten and I first got married, we were in the living room and Dorothy and we like to go at it sometimes, love her to death, but we like to go at it sometimes. And she left the room and he leaned over and he says, "That won't work." So he brought it home too. So I wanted to tell that story.
Other stories. Please.
I'm John Thorpe. I was in the graduate program, coming here with an undergraduate degree in art and mathematics. So I didn't go through the foundation program, but it was nice. And I kind of edged my way into Foundation Studios after my second year and built a good relationship with Gene and with Olivia. But I traveled on the study abroad and trip in 81 and then helped in 83 and was part of the one of the fellowship that we would get split up 3 ways back then among 3 different people to help the foundation program. But I just remember all these sort of Gene-isms that you all also probably remember. But speaking of the argument between Burger King and McDonald's, I remember Gene would always, like in the room, when we call us in and we'd be talking about something, he would always refer it to as Burger Chef. It was always just Burger Chef, and we didn't have a Burger Chef. But he said, "Oh, when you guys were walking up there by Burger Chef," it's like, and he knew that he would, but he would just always say this. But there was one quote that I remember he said once when there was somebody that I think was a visiting lecturer and spoke without notes and didn't do a great job. And Gene said, as I recall, "Nobody can lecture without notes except Ferrari and Bob Denay on a good day." And I just remember it was such a great thing. But I remember times just traveling with Gene. It was the year that Lucy wasn't well, and Olivia couldn't travel a lot with us. So it was through the Italy leg, it was just me and Gene strategizing over is when I learned about Vincenzo and Biscotti, and it was just great to sit with him and talk and learn that, especially that the purposes that you can have for sketching that are not just trying to make a picture you hang in a gallery. So.
Yeah, other comments, maybe we take a cue from you, John, about the sketching, and we haven't really talked so much about drawings and sketching, but obviously something we learned from Gene. Jack, do you want to say something? Okay.
I think it was 52 years ago. Gene was leading along with Fred Kirshner and Lucy Ferrari, the Salzburg trip. And Gene would make comments, and as some of you have referred to him, one that I remember in particular was in looking at a building that was really poorly designed, completely out of context. And he'd look at it and he'd say, "That architect, he was the best plumber in the band." That was a year that I learned that I thought that I wanted to go into teaching. And I discussed that real quickly with him. And Gene was, of course, really accommodating in that regard. And the next year, Robert Schubert, who's over here, he and I taught a class for credit an entire year on vernacular architecture. And it was Gene that set that up and made it possible for undergraduate students to teach a course. And one of the things that I'll leave you with that he impressed me with regarding teaching, he said that all good teachers needed to exhibit either tolerance or patience. And he said there are a few saints that have both. And I think that he had both.
I'll leave it open. Anyone else want to say something? We can kind of pick up that question of drawing a little bit, perhaps. You know, one of the things that I remember about Gene, whenever we were walking around the city, every once in a while, he would say, you know, I feel a sketch coming on, you know, and then he would go and sit down and start to draw. And I found this statement from John Ruskin, who also was pretty good sketcher, that I think maybe captures that desire. He said, there's a strong instinct in me, which I cannot analyze, to draw and describe the things I love, not for reputation, not for the good of others, nor for my own advantage, but a sort of instinct like that for eating and drinking. I should like to draw all of St. Mark's and all of Verona stone by stone, to eat it all up into my mind, touch by touch. And I think if you look at Gene's drawings, you know, they have that kind of, I mean, he's devouring that place, you know, something really quite beautiful about that drawing is not a substitute for a photograph. It's really, it is the place in a way, not an imitation of the place. It is the place. And I think that's what I appreciate so much about them. I don't know.
When we got back on the bus, sometimes he would encourage the students to finish the drawing after they left the place. And the students would say, well, I can't draw it, I'm not there. You know, and then the question is raised. If you're designing a building, say back in Blacksburg, that doesn't exist, how do you draw it? So he was working, exercising their memory. It was beautiful because then the sketchbook became a kind of obsession. It wasn't just when you were sketching at that moment, when you brought it back on the bus, when you brought it back to the hotel, brought it to breakfast. And yeah, you need a break and a grappa occasionally, but that was the beauty of it. It wasn't done. The drawing was not done. Gene never finished a drawing, maybe in a way, and that was the beauty of it. Once you make the building, well, it's not done anyway. It has to be maintained. But anyway, that was a beautiful thing to start to see. It was almost a kind of cult of the sketch, which I think distinguishes the students as they go out to an interview, and an architect might see one of these drawings and say, well, we could use some of that in our office. So I hope we stay about 25 years behind in that sense, trying to still finish the damn drawing. Right?
Bert, I have a question for you, and kind of just to shift gears about just kind of relationship between communities. Gene used to take people out into towns around Appalachia and sketch. I went with him a couple times. Dave and I kind of drove the van, I think a few times, sketching little churches, little communities, little towns. And, you know, for Gene, it wasn't just a kind of sketching exercise. He was really kind of learning about these places. I remember he would find the sort of
old people who were kind of hanging around, and he would learn about the place from them, stories. There was something kind of wonderful about reaching out to communities. Do you have experiences?
Well, no, I would say, I think in sort of this fog of culture that we live in, right, there were times when you could feel yourself completely divorced from that idea that the profession that you're aspiring to is for people. And I think to be in those kinds of communities with Gene, with all of those areas, there was a reminder, a reiteration, a reaffirmation that this is who you are aspiring to work with, right? Yes, we all want to make this a beautiful house or a large skyscraper, but understanding that humans are part of what we do. And even, I don't know where it came from, but going back through the 27 sketchbooks I still have from the career, they evolved to start to recognize that there is a humanity in all of that in some way. And those, I don't know when it was, but we felt like you go out 460, turn right, and just head into West Virginia, just keep going, right, until you found something new sort of every weekend. And that kind of sort of adventure seemed to come and still from being with these people in this place.
I think, you're right about that. When I still remember, I had the luxury to go to study abroad. But I had to go after I graduated because I could never afford to go. And I had spent, 2 springs in the media room sketching with everyone going. And eventually Edgar's like, why aren't you going? And I'm like, I can't afford to. He worked it so that I could go without paying tuition. I graduated, I was fine, I was coming back to teach, and he's like, okay, go now, don't pay tuition. That was a blessing for so many people to go to Europe, and you saw both the antiquity and the history and the modern stuff. But the company towns was a Saturday. Get in a van, someone's driving you, push you out. And for the people who did that, that was so more accessible in one way. And you're looking at things that no one raised on a pedestal, no one saw it in the history slides and talked about it. And you really had to force the physical, wrestling with that physicalness of that place and looking for how the bones of it gave it a structure and not avoiding the people who were there. And it wasn't like, wow, I got to go to Europe to do this. For the people who went to those company towns, they did it. For the Denays who looked at it in Blacksburg, it was like, look across the street. That's it. That's what you're doing. And it was an unbelievable way to access that without the burden of, oh, I get to go when I have enough money.
Other thoughts or comments from any of you in the audience? Please.
So I have to say something. I walked away from this place 42 years ago. I have not been back. And they've built like 5 other universities out there since I've been gone. I mean, it's bananas. But, so being here, it gives you that reflective time because, 42 years is a long time. And we've all had these, you go off and you have families and mortgages and dogs and all this stuff that goes on, careers. But this place, you're here for such a short period of time, but how it has stayed with me, and I'm sure all of us, is just incredible. And I had it, of course, with Gene. And, You know, so that's really what I wanted to say. The magic of being here for such a short period of time that infects and influences your whole life. And yes, that's sort of the thoughts on my mind in as a 42-year-old 42 year close. Yeah, I'm much older than that. I have grandchildren. My God. So thank you. It's really great being here.
Can I just ask for, just curious, all the people who went over to Europe with Gene, could you just raise your hand? I'm just curious. I was there when you got there. Well, thank you.
Yeah, please, Tom.
I'll try to say something. I'm not really good. Yeah, I'll try to say something a little bit. That's a good question. I went to Europe with Gene when I was 50 years old. Many of you guys went at 18 and 20. So I've never really been out of the country until I was 50. When I went out of the country, I went out of the country with Gene and Dorothy. And they were very, very kind to me. But in a reflection, and you sit here and you have your private thoughts and they go round and round, and you guys mentioned a few things, but Gene taught me something, truly did teach me something that in the back of my mind, I probably knew a little bit about, but he not only taught me it, he demonstrated it. And that's patience, truly. How often do you have the opportunity to go to a place and sit there for 2 or 3 hours? Gene, we don't have enough time. We got to leave. We got to leave, Tom. We got to leave. I'm not ready to leave. We have to leave. And I travel a little bit now, and I travel with family and other people. And sometimes places are checklists. Like, we've seen it, let's go. No, we have not seen it. We need to spend more time. We don't have time, Tom. We don't have time. We need to leave. So Gene did really teach me that the patience and the patience that comes with sketching. And Gene, I graduated like Bert. I'm a 12-year guy. I'm a 12-year graduate. But I had the opportunity to come back to the university, and Gene was kind enough to ask me to help do a study abroad with some students. And some of the students I teach and taught in the construction management program, building construction. We took some construction students along who were really checklist type people. I've seen it. I've done it. I did the Louvre in 10 minutes. I'm done. I'm gone. The Eiffel Tower, check, Notre Dame, check. And you really haven't seen it. And one of the things Gene did teach me was the patience and the ability to look at a place, a building, a square, and dissect it just a little bit. Some students do pictorials, and so we talk about pictorials, but we then talk about analytics, being able to do an analytical, being able to do a layer, take a layer off, take a layer off. And when I did architecture, I always talk about we build drawings. When we build a project, we build it in layers. We start in a layer, we do another layer, we do another layer until we've finally put that puzzle together. And each layer is a discussion as to what do you include, what do you exclude. So the ability to not only have patience and sit in a place for at least an hour, hour and a half or longer, and really truly see the place, dissect the place, understand the place, know the place. And that's something Gene really did teach me, that ability to look at a place with patience.
Thanks. Bob?
I was reluctant to say something because there's been so many beautiful thoughts about a life. I wasn't sure I could make another statement that was different, but as I've been sitting in the back of the room for an hour and a half, I've been hearing all the great thoughts and memories, but I've also been wandering through those 2 sketches that are on the wall. And the more I looked at them, the more I started to wander. And it also started to be that it starts to have a depth that somehow you don't realize that's there, but somehow as you uncover it, you start to find something else. And in a sense, it has to do with precision. And in one sense, the sketches look fairly fast and kind of rough, but there's an unbelievable precision of perception in every sketch I think Gene did. So all the sketches have had that. So he was very, very precise, but in a way that wasn't very accessible immediately. And he was also like this in daily life, because I remember in one trip we were on the coast of the Mediterranean, and we got to a restaurant, or got to the hotel really late. So everyone was really hungry. And Gene knew where the restaurant was, and he knew it would be easy to find. And the students asked, where is the restaurant? And his only instruction was, go down to the Mediterranean and turn right. And then he walked away.
Of course, the mic's up a little too high for me. Some of you know me as a student, as a colleague here, as someone who's been fortunate enough to come in and occasionally give a lecture or talk to some students. Bob Dene was one of my best teachers. Donna was one of my best teachers. Ron was one of my best teachers. Gene was, I never had him, but he was one of my best teachers. Bert was a great teacher. He was a year younger than me, he's still infinitely more wise than I am, right? Sean, who probably doesn't know me from a hole in the wall, was a teacher. Hunter remains a teacher. Terry Ammons is a teacher. And I think we're talking about an atmosphere here. The word atmosphere was used, and I think beautifully, Mitzi. That there's an atmosphere here which is nurtured by the faculty, each of whom are really challenging us to think, not telling us what to do. There's no top-down, sort of ideological position. There are no faculty parroting each other. It was all a matter of involving the students in a very meaningful dialogue. And Gene did that. And when I went to Texas, I'm still in Texas. Don't have the belt yet. I think I took a lot of Gene with me. I think I took a lot of Walter Butke with me. I think I took a lot of Milka Blishnikov with me. I hope to have taken a little bit of Bob Dene. I started a study abroad program there because we had failed at study abroad. We tried to start it and we failed it. And I began to really think about study abroad. And I had actually called up Gene out of the blue to talk to him about study abroad. I think that changed my whole perspective. It kept me in Texas, of course, if you're spending half the year in Italy. It allowed me to actually engage in a different sort of discussion with my teachers. And I had one beautiful, beautiful story of Gene was going to visit San Antonio. And of course, I'm super excited. I couldn't wait. Dorothy and Gene were coming. They were coming not to see my wife and I. They were coming to see Stan Thomason. And Stan was running the program at Auburn, and he hired Olivia Ferrari, like sight unseen. It's like, okay, he's coming from Max Bill's office. Must be great. Let's hire him. And Stan was teaching at UTSA when I arrived. And I said to myself, geez, anyone who's been the teachers of my teacher, I've got to be here. I've got to be under their tutelage. So even after these years, you still find that what Gene has given me was a sense that all of you guys are my teachers. And I have something to learn from former students, that I have something to learn from people who know how to photograph, because I don't. I have something to learn from each of you. And that was a gift that came from Gene, it came from this school. And it's something that I will certainly cherish. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Mark, you mentioned something. You were never in Gene's design lab.
No.
And I think, Sean, you said the same thing. He never gave you a grade, right? But somehow he was your teacher. He was influential in your life as an architect. And, I think there's a kind of influence that persists in the school. When I give tours to prospective students, I tell them and the parents that every architecture school has a kind of personality. And so that's important that they try to discern that, a kind of atmosphere that the place has. And, you know, I think Gene was one of those people who kind of established that, created that, you know, with what this place has been, hopefully continues to be, right, persists. Yeah, I don't really have a question there, it's just a comment, but
Yeah, I think Melissa Howell and I were talking about this last night. She was 2 years behind me. We both graduated in the mid-80s. And I don't think we realized how young the Danays were and Ron were, if you can believe it now. And the difference was, I think Edgar came with a little more, had just a little more tenure. And Ferrari was out there, God knows, like he was there, but Edgar was vulnerable, accessible. I still don't get the Danae's humor, right? Sometimes it's so dry. I'm like, are they being funny or are they not? Melissa reminded me, Edgar performed for us. He threw chalk at people. He engaged. He was so enthusiastic and funny on a day-to-day basis. At times, I think that Danae and Ron, I mean, you guys were only 10 years, 15 years, 12 years older than us. They were more reticent. And Gene was just so outgoing, it was hard not to be influenced by that atmosphere. And I think he set a very strong position between that guy who was the Italian, right, who was over there, and the young ones. And he worked that position so well. At times he translated Ferrari. This is what he's telling you. Just go do it, right? And he could perform with a sense of humor and engagement that was just so encompassing. That was what was beautiful about it.
I've been thinking about this moment the entire time I've been here, maybe even before I arrived, and it's not exactly a Gene story, but I think it's exactly a Gene story. When I was a graduate student at Stanford, so this was after I'd been an architecture student and I taught some, I practiced a little bit, then I went back and became a student again. And I was a TA for a professor in engineering named Jim Adams. Some of you may have known of him. He was an author and a great man like Gene, so much like Gene. Had a big atmospheric presence. He was a large man. And so I was in between semesters or terms helping him. So I was an assistant, then we had a summer off and I came back from the summer and I came into his office to kind of get settled into whatever I was going to do for him. And he was just weeping. And I was trying to figure out how to deal with that. So this little anecdote's about death. And I was thinking, as I was sitting here thinking, at that point in my life, I don't think anybody really close to me had died. And so this would have been 1992. I've had at least 12 people die that were really, really close to me since then. And so I'm seeing this man gently melt a bit. And I'm trying to figure out what's wrong, and I'm trying to think, what can I do for him? And he had just lost his closest friend, who he considered to be his twin, and that gentleman was an architect. And I am embarrassed to say that I cannot remember the gentleman's name. I was going to look it up, but I don't know how long it would take me through my phone to find that. But he was, he was a fairly seminal figure in the Bay Area, so it wasn't trivial, and it certainly wasn't trivial to Jim. And he was I just thought, this is this giant figure at Stanford, right? And a giant figure in his world. And he is just at his knees about having lost this friend who was, as he said, his twin. And I just said to him, Jim, I don't know what to say to you, but you've just now given this to me, and I'm never going to forget this moment. And it's the thing I'm going to take with me. And that is all that you can do, is to take him with you. And we all must do that with people that influence us and give to us. And that is the only way to move forward when somebody dies. And I feel that way about Gene and so many others too. But you take him with you, and all of you have brought that here. That is, and you give it forward, right? It is part, it becomes part of your composition. And I just think that's the only way to be with grief and then to tell the bigger story moving forward.
There was a student who sent me an email today. She traveled with Jean and Reva the last time Jean went to Reva, the graduate student. And she said, I'm really bummed that I can't be here. And I said, well, tell me what you remember about Jean. And then she told me, I said, well, you're here. You know, you're in some city now. So don't worry that you can't make it. And don't worry that you can't make it. One story about Jean and teaching and advice that he gave me. He came by the studio and I had the students pinning up. It's a big decision studio faculty make. Should the group pin up? And then they put their work up. You don't know what you're going to say, right? Are you going to improvise, or do you have a question, or are you going to read a quote from John Ruskin? What are you going to do? And so Jean said, "What do you know what you're going to say?" And he said, "You're not going to say stuff like, well, there's really a wide range of work that you all did." You know, that's kind of a stalling thing. So that's what I was going to say.
I started here in 59 years ago, I think, in school. And I started in business administration and I hated it. And then I looked down the hall in the dorm and there were these architecture students that were having a ball and staying up all night and creating wild things. And that caught my attention. And after painstakingly putting everybody off that you were to go be a flunk out, I came back in architecture and I came to Herbert Cromwell and I came to Ferrari and I came to the beginnings of the school. And I'd like to just acknowledge that Charles Burchard started the College of Architecture. I'm not exactly sure what that connection was that he got to do that. But Ferrari and then later Cromwell came right away to the school. And I can name a number of other meaningful professors that made us not want to go anywhere but the design lab. And we spent years there creating the things, making a philosophy for ourselves and arguing with others for this, because their philosophy wasn't good enough for what we were doing. And remarkable things happened in the middle 1960s here. And I look at this here and I say that we all miss Gene Egger, and I knew him well, but I didn't know him in a lot of ways. I didn't know him because I never had him as a student. But what we did get was an environment that is, I'm so pleased to see, is so strong still here today as 59 years ago when it was a bunch of students that were staying up all night and studying the cube. And Ron and I were freshmen together, actually, and the world shook and we all felt it. So we know it was a special time, and I'm so pleased to see that it still is for so many people. Thank you.
Just one other thought. We had an accreditation visit in the year 2000. I was administrator, and the head of the team was a pretty tough person. And I just sort of decided I would live in my office like George Costanza. You know, I slept under the desk for that week because I didn't know, do you need paper clips? You need staples. And they wrote the report and we got the report, we got accreditation. Thank you very much. But there was a line in the report: the faculty are fiercely protective of the school. And I was really proud that we got that demerit. In other words, we were proud of the school and we protected the idea of the school. And I think it was meant as a criticism. But I wasn't smart enough to realize it was a criticism. You protect the things that you love, right? Sort of normal. What was he thinking? You know, the guy was an idiot, sorry. But we survived, thanks to a lot of efforts. And I know that those visits come up. The in-laws will visit soon, you know, the school. And you make your bed and you fluff the pillows, but you don't want to lose your soul in the process, right? And it's not easy. It's not easy for deans. It's not easy for presidents, provosts, anyone. A lot of times it's a chance to get like an elevator, right? You need something. So anyway, that's quite an extraordinary thing. Sorry, I've been retired, so I haven't really talked to anyone.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I think, oh, one more, Donna, okay.
So the accreditation brought this to mind, Frank. So I just have to say it, but it takes me there. Most of you, in any case, we have, I can't say 2001, what year it was, but the accreditation was a little bit rough. I can't say it was that one. I mean, there were these things. So that is what prompted me to go to Frank. So maybe it was that time and say, please put my name in for to be on these accreditation boards. I want to be there because I decided we need to do something about this. Visiting other schools. So I've had the chance to visit many schools. Schools are beautiful. They're all different, how the people put them together, the faculty. It's incredible. And it's a serious process, but in any case, there's one thing that it was tough for me to kind of deal with in the milieu of this accreditation stuff, because there was this thing about crits or juries, and we never used that word jury. There would be a pinup. So it was tough because I never understood it. I didn't experience that. I mean, we all had tough comments, but the conversation would continue the next day or be referred to 2 years hence. And then it would loop around in the faculty. And so it was truly a school. So there was part of what was going on in schools, and there was a lot of complaints about this, about the juries just being tough. And I just didn't get it. But hearing this prompted it, why I didn't get it. Because as usual, we would have a pinup, tell the students pin up, or sometimes the students on their own volition would just pin up. There it is. And we'd have to respond. So, but in any case, this was sort of an official. And Jean and I were standing there looking at this project. I don't know if it's happened in your experience or your office or your studio, but here this student had this high rise. Everybody wants to do a high rise, right? And at the base of the high rise, there was the site, dead level. Okay, so, you know, what do you say to someone? And I said, because here was this high rise, this drawing just going up. So I said, well, that's a high rise and you're making a section. So below that line, actually, the person had nothing. I shouldn't say nothing. There was a board there. There was space. And I made a comment that You know, when you put something up, there's something down. That's a section that drawing should capture. I said it differently, of course. And Jean was there. So he came back and he picked up that comment. And he said, that was very kind of you, Donna, to talk about. And then he described the situation that we're talking about a section, and a section does not end at a dead level horizon. I think that was the part and parcel, as they say, of the school that so many contributed to and Jean contributed to. I never understood situations of faculty doing things that were described elsewhere because of that kind of experience. That the faculty were talking, not to each other to challenge each other, but for the basis of the student to learn. And for him to say that was a very kind comment. I don't know about the student, but I think that served as a chance for the student to linger on what this was. So thanks, Frank, for the prompt about accreditation.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. I really appreciated conversation with you, and thank you all for sharing. We can continue this in the reception. So we can share some stories there.